Well, hello there, all you SRB podders and patrons. Whether you're listening to us or watching it, you know that most of this week's episode was going to be taken up with the review of Scotland's Autumn Nations match against Fiji, which was unfortunately cancelled due to the Fiji squad all catching COVID. So it left us with a pretty big hole to fill, and for a big hole to fill, you need a big man, and we've certainly got one here. Former Manu Samoa star turned documentary filmmaker Daniel Leo. Hopefully you'll join me in wishing him a warm Afeo Mai. Daniel, how are you?
I love it. Yep. Your Samoan's probably better than mine. So, hey, well done, mate. Kudos. I can't respond anything in Scottish, though. Your guys' language is another level of difficulty above ours.
Yeah, so it's all very guttural. No, it's one of the joys of... I was in New Zealand myself a few years ago, and one of my work colleagues was Samoan, so she gave me a bit of advice. So, I mean, obviously we're here mainly to talk about your documentary, Oceans Apart, but can you just tell us a bit more about your journey into rugby and your career? So you were born and raised in Auckland, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was born in New Zealand, in Palmerston North. My father was first generation Samoan to New Zealand, so like many of the current crop of Samoan players, and not just the Samoan players, the New Zealand players with Samoan ancestry. Our parents came over in a wave of migrants for economic reasons, mainly when through the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when New Zealand was going through industrialization. Required, low-skilled labourers to work in the factories, and the Pacific Islands were a cheap source of labour. So Dad came over as part of that wave, and I was a product of that. Started playing rugby. That was the way that not many people knew about Pacific Islanders back then, even in New Zealand. And one way that it was probably quite old school, and sort of the approach. They were different. They looked different. They spoke different, and quite often they were put in a box. One way that you got you earned respect very quickly in New Zealand in the 80s was on the rugby field. And so that was where my dad sort of earned his stripes. And you could be from any walk of life, and when you got on that field, if you performed and you played and you embraced the values, you were accepted, and no matter what sort of color or background you were from. And so that was rugby. It was very much a working class game in New Zealand, and and it was something that my dad instilled in me that was very important to him. And I guess I grew up with that ambition to want to I realized quite from a young age that was one way that I could make my dad very proud, by sort of performing on that stage. So started playing, went through school in New Zealand, went to Auckland Grammar, a very famous rugby school, produced the most All Blacks, more than any other school in New Zealand, which is amazing. And then moved to Queensland. My parents moved to Queensland in Australia in the end of 1999, again for job reasons, and I followed them, and went through the academy. I was lucky enough to get into the Queensland Reds Academy here in Australia, and I guess the rest is history in terms of my professional career. Sort of did three years in the academy, 1 year of Super Rugby, and Samoa came to play against the Wallabies, and Michael Jones, famous All Black 7, was the coach of Samoa at the time, and gave me the call up to come and play for Samoa, which was just given my heritage and the pride that I had in my dad's culture, even though I've never lived in Samoa myself. It was a call that I couldn't refuse.
So then, once you've made your debut for Samoa, you moved to Europe, spent a lot of time mainly playing in England. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I couldn't stay in Australia. I had a great time in Australia, but unfortunately, with the eligibility laws, they would only allow players to play for their Super Rugby sides who qualified for the Wallabies, and obviously it's one of the issues that we touch on in the in the documentary, the Oceans Apart documentary, is this question of eligibility, and I guess in my situation, it meant that I couldn't play in Australia where my family were anymore, so I had to move further abroad if I wanted to continue playing professionally. So I moved. Yeah, thankfully I had an opportunity to go to Wasps, which was at the top of their game at the time back in the early 2000s. And I came under the wing of guys like Lawrence Dallaglio and Joe Worsley and Simon Shaw, who I didn't know, I'd never heard of before I arrived at the club. But who was the best thing for my rugby and for my career at that time, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity to not just to win trophies, but also to make a decent living for the next 15 years that I was in Europe. Not the whole time at Wasps, but I had a little stint in France and then came back and finished my playing career in at London Irish and then London Welsh. Right at the end there, but fantastic journey and lots of fond memories, but yeah, really probably that time in Europe really shaped me into the person that I am now.
And of course, now that you've hung up the boots, you've turned into a documentary filmmaker. So Oceans Apart, obviously, it's really caught the imagination of the rugby loving public. So what was your sort of motivation to make the documentary? Because obviously I remember, I know your international career was somewhat cut short, and that was your sort of first steps into anti-corruption activism, I suppose.
Yeah, no, you're right. I guess I was one of a number of players in the Samoan team at the time who were there. We had a great rise from the sort of early 2000s to about 2012, 13, where we actually, we'd got to ourselves to 7th in the world rankings. 2010, we beat the Wallabies for the first time ever in Sydney. And then 2012, we went on to beat Wales, Scotland, Italy. We had some big tier 1 scalps. 2014 arrives. We're about to play England at Twickenham, and a bombshell arrives in the form of we were suspected for a long time that money was being embezzled by our union, but then we got the evidence provided by actually it was an accountant for the Samoan Rugby Union who had just been sacked, and he believed wrongfully, and so he basically had the shits and said, look, well, I'm going to expose you and provide. It was an internal audit that hadn't been released into the Rugby World Cup fundraisers that were done in 2011, where we'd raised millions of pounds, and most of it had gone missing, and we now had the evidence. So I guess so that was my eyes opened really to the situation when we received that report as to the situation, and it was just too big an issue really for us to as players to move on from, and just to lay to one side. We felt like we had to confront it. A lot of us were at the ends of our careers. I was in my early 30s by that stage, and I think any player wants to leave a jersey in a better position than when they first picked it up, and that was definitely the case for me and my colleagues at the time. And so we decided to make a stand, and that stand ultimately resulted in us all getting relief from our positions on the side. But we knew that at the time. We knew that it's unfortunately the first ones through the glass, or over the wall, so to speak, are the ones that are probably going to take the bullets. And but we believe it had to be done for the better betterment of Samoan rugby and Pacific Island rugby. So so that's sort of triggered the journey to where we are now. And I guess 6 or 7 years later, we're just there. We are where we are with the documentary, and hopefully, positive change can be the result of all of this. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah. So when did you start making the documentary?
I've been basically a year after being basically sacked from the Samoan Rugby Union, myself and a lot of the players that had been through similar situations, not just from Samoa, but from Tonga and Fiji, had joined forces to set up Pacific Rugby Players Welfare, the organisation which I'm now CEO of, which represents we've got over 500 members under that umbrella now, of professional and semi-professional descent from the Pacific Islands playing in Europe predominantly. We sat down in 2016 and talked about a whole lot of issues with our board, and ultimately we wanted to address the root causes of a lot of the symptoms. So the symptoms being a lot of our players arriving in Europe, we felt that a lot of them were, times were being exploited. There were cultural difficulties. We had a very high suicide rate due to depression and that distance away from home and not having the community and the support networks around us that were necessary. But again, all of those were symptoms of what we believed were overarching issues within the system that allowed those things, or not, if not allowed, made them more likely. So we needed to address those, and for us to address them, we needed to know what they were. So I embarked on this journey, I suppose, and we wanted to document it 3 years ago to really to raise the awareness, because we knew that if we were ever going to get anywhere with addressing the issues, we needed the rugby public to know what those issues were, so that they could get behind us to rectify them, I guess. So that was the start. We didn't know we didn't know at the time it was going to be a documentary or what that was going to look like. We just thought, let's just get the cameras rolling, and ask some tough questions of ourselves and of others. I think it was important that we were able to look at ourselves introspectively and look at our cultures as well as some of the issues that were holding us back. And that's where we started. And I guess, the fruition of that was the Oceans Apart film, which was released 2 weeks ago tomorrow and has had a fantastic response by the rugby public. So big journey. Again, we don't know really where it ends, but we're on it, and we're thankful to everyone that's made the film a success so far.
So when you first moved to England, obviously PRPW didn't exist. Have you seen from your work there? Have you seen a sort of improvement in standards? Do you think that players are less likely to be exploited now, specifically maybe because of the work you're doing or your organisation even?
Yeah, well, the suicide rates definitely dropped, which was a massive causal factor for us getting together in the first place. We had 4 or 5 players take their lives within a very short space of time, which really fast-tracked PRPW into existence. We just didn't feel like we could wait around any longer, and we didn't feel like anyone else had the answers to the issues in our community piece apart from ourselves. We knew we had to be central to those fixes, I guess. I mean, in the UK, the Pacific Island boys have always been generally looked after pretty well. Our main concern was the treatment of some of the players on the continent. Particularly in the lower divisions of France and the emerging competitions like Romania, where we spoke to Sione Valmunga in the film. Spain now is the fastest growing semi-professional competition and intake of Pacific Islanders in the world now. So we've got a huge amount of players heading to Spain, Germany now, Holland. Almost anywhere that they play rugby, we've got guys there, because these are countries that are trying to build their competitions. They're trying to get their teams up to since rugby went into the Olympics, and the way that you can very quickly increase your performance of your team is by bringing in ready-made players. So basically, since the induction of rugby into the Olympics, we've seen a massive boost in the demand on Pacific Island players, not just in the traditional rugby heartlands, but now in the non-traditional as well, where probably the support is even more important. there's lots and lots of issues that, we've touched on a few of those. But yeah, we feel like we're making ground, I guess, as an organisation, but we've got a lot of work to do. We're not under any illusions, and the documentary itself was, I guess, aimed at trying to get people alongside us, which thankfully, in the 2 weeks that it's been released, we've seen, a massive influx of support and people wanting to to see the best for Pacific Island players, and there's a lot of goodwill in the community, which I've received hundreds, if not thousands, of messages of support. It's not just support saying good luck, but people coming forth and offering their services. Media, marketing people, people in the health sector, doctors, people in construction that can offer jobs post rugby up, you name it. Someone's probably lent their hand to us through email. And if any of those people are watching, sorry I haven't had a chance to reply. It's been a busy 2 weeks since we launched, but I will get around to it. And it's amazing. The public, we know that the rugby public is hold the key to us, to our success, not just as an organisation, as Pacific Rugby Players World, but also the success of the Pacific Islands moving forward in terms of the influence that they have on their own governing bodies. Because as we delved into the documentary, we need that assistance to come from, we need a shift in mentalities from the not just World Rugby, but the Tier 1 nations as well. And the key to that shift lies in the public and the people that those governing bodies represent.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I mean, there is a number of shocking revelations within the film. Actually, I'm just there. I assume most people who are listening to this will have watched the documentary. And if you haven't watched the documentary, it's available on Amazon Prime. Can you just give us an update on Sione? Because I know at the end of the movie it says you managed to raise, I mean, for those of you who haven't seen it, this is a really pretty dreadful story. Sione Vaiamunga, is he Tongan or is he one?
Tongan, yeah. Tongan played for Tonga in the 2011 World Cup.
Yeah, and then he was moved to Romania, and then discovered he had some kidney issues, and basically the club just cast him aside. So at the end of the film, it says you've managed to raise £30,000 to pay for some of the treatment. How is Sione now? Is he back in Tonga, or is he still in Romania?
Yeah, so basically he's still in Romania with his family. The average expectancy of a kidney transplant is about 11 years on average. They last about 11 years, and then the chances are you'll need another. So we've actually advised Sione to stay in Romania with his family while he's being monitored, just to see how that process. The worry is that he goes back to Tonga and that he won't ever be able to get back to a country that has the facilities to be able to operate on him again if a relapse was to happen. So we're just weighing up his options at the moment. Again, since the film has come out, we've had a lot of people contact us saying, "Oh, look, can we donate to his to his cause?" So yeah, he's still in a tough position, but we're hoping that that we can get some sort of basically. Once he's got citizenship in Romania, him and his family, they'll be able to return even after, if he was to go back to Tonga. But he doesn't have citizenship yet, so we're just encouraging him to stay in Romania until he's qualifies for that citizenship. Hopefully, we'll still have money in the pot to be able to fund that citizenship process. And then if he does go back to Tonga and something goes wrong, he can go back to, to Romania or anywhere in Europe to, for treatment. So that's the long-term plan with Sione. Yeah, if anyone's watching out there and wants to donate, please do get in touch with us though, because yeah, £30,000 when you've got three children and you can't work and his wife can't work either, doesn't go far in Europe, and it's as you'd probably know.
Financial or kidneys are available for donations there, guys. Yeah, so one of the things like you talked on there, obviously, it's a it's a bit of a multi-headed beast to try and sort this problem. But it's the sort of the cash split from the tier one nations. Like it says in the film. I mean, this is unbelievable. Some of the stuff. Who's it you're speaking to? Is it Cooper Vuna? And he said he got paid £300 for a 4-match series in Britain. So that's £75 a match. I've made more than that writing on domestic club rugby in Scotland. So, how do you, when in terms of gate receipts, right? Because as it is, the home nation takes all the money. What would you like to see split there, or what do you think World Rugby should be doing in order to make it a more equal distribution of wealth?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the fact that the governing body have come back and said they don't have any authority to impose any gate share on anybody, again, is was quite disappointing. You mentioned there Cooper Vuna and the fact that the Tongan players, sometimes get paid £80 on average, £80 a game for a tour, and they're playing in front of, at times, Wales at the Millennium Stadium, 40 or 50,000 people there, probably paying more, in some instances paying more than £80 a ticket. It just doesn't sit right. Last time I looked, rugby was a professional game. Well, £80 a week, because you got to factor in, you're not just there for the one, you're not just arriving for the game, you're there all week building up to this game. So those guys are getting paid £11 a day. Now that doesn't meet the minimum wage, does it? So for World Rugby to turn around and wash their hands of the situation, say, oh no, hold on, we can't do anything that's, that impedes on the contractual agreements that some of these countries have with each other. That's just not good enough. It's there's a minimum wage for a reason in these countries, and if you're not meeting that, that's actually borderline criminal negligence. So there is actually a case for us as an organisation to actually go further than making a documentary about it and actually pursuing legal action on behalf of our members. Now, we don't want to do that because we believe in the greater good of the rugby public and the rugby, values. And all we're asking is that, those governing bodies actually align themselves with what is not just what is legal, but what is fair. And those two terms are very different. And actually, from all the messages that I've received from, since the documentary's been made, the rugby values are what the public wants upheld. And we can sniff a rat a mile away, and that's my concern is that it's taken us to make a documentary and basically shame World Rugby and the tier one nations into doing, considering the right thing. That shouldn't ever be the case. Why can't they do just because it's the right thing to do? So we don't want to go down the legal pathway, but if we're going to be pushed into a corner, then we're going to have no choice. And it becomes bigger than the sport. But we don't want to have to do that. I guess we as I said, those governing bodies, they're reflective of the desires of the people that they represent, and they have to be. So we believe that getting the public to put the pressure on their unions, and we encourage anyone who's watched the film to please write to your home unions. And actually, we're in the process of setting up an email system that will make that process easier, where they'll just have to sign it and send off, and it'll be we'll have a 5-point system that will go straight to World Rugby and to their local national union as well. Look out for that. That'll be we'll be releasing that over the next few days. But yeah, action points, I guess, is important. But yeah, ultimately, again, it comes to the rugby values. And World Rugby are the first ones to wave those values to the world, and it's all emblazoned all over the website, all over all of their all over the sport. Wherever you look, it's we talk about rugby values. So to see those values not being lived is sad, I guess.
Yeah, it's always, hashtag rugby values, but it's just lip service. So I was actually going to ask, what do you suggest, the general fan in the street, what can we do? But certainly if you've got if you've got like an online petition, we'll gladly share that around. Yeah, that's one thing actually, is when you were talking about World Rugby's sort of non-committance, in the documentary, when you actually sort of get a hold of Brett Gosper, I mean, obviously I actually studied film at university, and I know you can edit things to look a certain way, but he's just so non-committal about everything all the time, or he's just sort of like, he just sort of shrugs his shoulders. It's like, you're in charge of the game, surely you should be leading the way. So that's disappointing. But
yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree. I think as players and as rugby supporters and fans, or wherever you fall into the rugby family, you always, my understanding was always that World Rugby or the IRB or whatever they call themselves are the overarching sort of organisation that hold everybody to account, and that's what I've always seen as a governing body's role. Through my discoveries and speaking to Brett, you actually work out that it was actually, it's actually the governing body sit below the tier 1 nations, and that was a real shock to me, making this film, and actually him saying that we don't have any power. Effectively, we don't have any power, because unless those nations that wield the influence, agree to something, for eligibility, for instance, and I asked them directly, well, what about eligibility? Is there a way that the Pacific Island boys who may have been capped for a tier 1 nation can come back if they're no longer wanted? And his direct answer to me was, well, that wasn't something that was seen as favourable to the members. Well, if the members are predominantly made up of tier 1 nations with 3 votes, and those 10 nations outweigh the wishes of 120 tier 2 or 3 countries, then you can have 120 nations who would want that rule to be allowed, but because the 10 don't, it doesn't get passed through. So maybe that was the case. Who knows? And maybe it wasn't, but maybe it was. And that's again a flaw in the system that has allowed, because it'll never change if that's the case. And it's disappointing. It's disappointing when and it sort of takes the wind out of your sails, really, when it comes to and you're hopeful for change, when a lot of these these nations are just so against what we see as the development of the sport. Because for me, it's a no-brainer. You build the game, you have more competition, you have a better product, and more people want to watch rugby because more than 4 teams can turn up to a World Cup and actually have a realistic chance of winning it, and that grows the interest, the sponsorship, everything. So your small piece of the pie, whatever you've got, or your large piece of it, becomes worth even more, if you grow that pie. So it is a bit small-minded for me, even from the tier 1 nations, that they can't see that. But hey, we've got to keep pushing them for accountability, and if we want this game to be the truly global game that we, I guess, as rugby fans all want it to be, we need that protectionist spirit, I guess, to shift.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say with the tier 1s, I mean, their stance, it's sort of understandable but inexcusable. I think it goes against the spirit of competition. Like when the League of Nations idea was mooted, obviously, I think Scotland and Wales had vetoed it. But one of the big issues with that for me was the fact that the teams that they were going to bring in, Georgia, USA and Japan, although they're sort of going, look, we're giving these tier 2 nations a shot. It's like, you're giving the ones with the most money a shot, aren't you? Rather than, say, Fiji, Tonga and Samoa, who have proven themselves at World Cup to be, good foes, basically. Another thing that's raised is that no, it's very rare that Tier 1 nations go and play in the Pacific Islands. Why do you think that is? I mean, so I find it also a bit strange. Let's say England are going to go and do a 3-match series down in Australia or something. Would it not be worthwhile to have a tune-up match, and also even just for the good press, to pop into Samoa or Fiji or whatever and just play a game there?
Yeah, I think again it's based on this so-called reciprocal agreement. So Australia come and play a three-test series in Europe. That's going to be reciprocated when those sides come down to to the south. The problem being is, again, you follow the money. There's no money to be made in the Pacific Islands. We would, if under the current agreement, if we were to host one of those nations as Samoa, we'd have to pay for their travel expenses, their hotels. There's minimum hotels that you can't just put them in a backpacker place where they put, so the Samoan team, we always stay in two-star hotels, but you can't put a visiting team in a 2-star hotel. You've got to put them in a 4 or 5-star hotel with a certain amount of screens for analysis, and a room, a special air-conditioned room for physios and all that sort of stuff. So it all becomes very expensive. And the reality is we just can't afford it. We brought our closest neighbours, Tier 1 neighbours, to Samoa in 2015. New Zealand came. We lost $1 million. That's £400,000, which was, so it's just to have more Tier 1 nations visit us under the current agreement would bankrupt us, and that's the reality. So that's not the answer until the system changes, and that financial agreement changes to the point where we can earn a bit of a share from the matches that we play in the north, a la FA Cup, I suppose, where those smaller teams, when they play a Chelsea or a Man United, they get a share. It's and it's a bit of a payday for those smaller clubs as well. That's, I guess, the model that we need to see in the Pacific for us to grow.
Obviously, there has been sort of issues internally. So, obviously yourself, when you raised the issues about the Samoan corruption, Fiji, interesting story there, what with Francis Keane and Frank Bainimarama. So how would you sort of advocate World Rugby, or is there a way that you see World Rugby being able to prevent people who aren't fit and proper persons, or who don't certainly seem to be fit and proper persons, interfering in the domestic rugby unions there?
Yeah, I believe, since making the film, and I've had a while to reflect on this, there needs to be a law like most other major sports have got, that disallows people in public office to hold positions of power in rugby union as well. There's just too much of a conflict there. There's always going to be question marks around their motives. For me, there needs to be a distance between politicians and the game of rugby, particularly in the islands, where it's seen as a way that to win votes. It's hearts and minds at the end of the day. If you control rugby, you control the hearts and minds of the people, and that's why they're so close. There might not necessarily even be any financial gain to be made, but it's the way that our Prime Minister, people know Samoa for rugby. It's what's put us on the map, and he wants to be seen as the guy at the top of that. But yeah, it's got to change. For me, again, it comes back to the governing body, looking at other sports. I know FIFA, for instance, don't allow They, don't allow politicians to be involved with the administration of the game, and if they do, there's financial penalties. They penalise. They can stop them from partaking in tournaments, etc., etc. But for that to happen, there needs to be a way also for us to be able to make money and become profitable. And the reason, again, we look at the film is one of the reasons why our unions are so reliant on the politicians is that we just don't have the we don't have enough games to be able to get proper sponsorship. When we do get fixtures against England or Wales or Scotland, for instance, usually we know about 3 months in advance. Well, sponsorship, a run into getting decent sponsorship is, probably we would need to know 2 years in advance. So there's a lot of issues there. And then, the fact that there's, to put it frankly, that we can't, and one of the CEOs of Samoa Rugby said it to me. Without politics, there's no rugby. There's no rugby in the Pacific without the politicians funding it, and that needs to change equally as much as getting rid of the politicians. In my mind, it's got to be two-pronged. Because as long as we're reliant on government funding and public funding for our unions, in the absence of a fair financial share elsewhere, the politicians are always going to expect to be involved.
Cool. Great. If you don't mind, I've got a as well as the Scottish Rugby blog, I'm also I've been promoted to co-chief admin on the Scottish Rugby Forum. And I've got a question from one of the guests there, and it's regarding eligibility. Now, I think I know how you're going to answer this, but I'll let you answer it yourself. This gentleman, Peter KH is his name here. I don't know what the KH stands for. He disapproves of the homecoming rule. Because he thinks that, he's 3 points here, he believes that it advantages some tier 2 nations other than others. So like Samoa, Fiji and Tonga would benefit more than Georgia, USA and Uruguay. But then, I mean, I think this is the one that will really pique your interest, is that he says that no Pacific Island player have been exploited by the absence of this rule, and that they've chosen to play for, say, Australia or New Zealand or whatever their adopted nation is. What would you say in response to particularly that second point?
Well, firstly, I don't know how many Uruguayans have been poached, and taken over to play, to have cracked it in a tier 1 nation. Have any? I don't know. To answer a question with a question, have any Uruguayan players ever played for a tier 1 nation yet?
I don't think so. I think the sort of probably the most sort of obscure one I can think of would be Tim Visser playing for Scotland, because Holland's not much of a rugby country.
Yeah. So I think Tim Visser should be able to go back and play for Holland. At the end of his career. Holland's a developing nation. Someone like that will be massive profile to that sport, as long as it's going from a tier 1 down to a tier 2, and for the development of those countries. I don't see what the issue is. It would reflect, global migration. Very few people see themselves as one thing anymore. And, the decisions that we encounter, as Pacific Islanders, are made in a totally different position at the start of your career when you're poor, and your sole objective in life is to try and make a better life for you and your family. That's often when that decision to play for a tier 1 nation is made while you're young. Later on in your career, you're more you're more stable in terms of your finances, and and that's really when the decision of your heart comes into play. So so I think a lot of those guys, do we want people playing for the money at the end of the day, just for the money, or is loyalty taken into consideration in our sport, and pride in the jersey and your homeland? I think it's got to be probably both. So the eligibility laws need to reflect both of those situations. I think going down from a tier 1, a sensible thing for me would be going down from a tier 1 to a tier 2 and one change only. It probably would benefit Samoa and Tonga more than Georgia and Uruguay. But to take a page out of Brett Gosper's book, that if you look at historically the contribution of countries to the game, I like to argue that Tonga and Samoa have contributed in a historic context a heck of a lot more than those two countries that I just mentioned. Maybe that'll change at some stage, and Uruguay will start providing, feeling this drain of players, and they might start providing up to a quarter of the world's professional players like we do, and that they may change, and a rule like this that we're talking about would actually benefit them more. But I don't think you can say, look, we're gonna block a rule because because it doesn't affect everybody equally until those countries are given a chance to be in our position. And you look at those countries like Georgia. The population of rugby players in Georgia is almost as high as the population of Tonga. So there are massive colonies. Again, it's not, you can't it's oranges and apples to make comparisons. I guess in some context we've got to be, we need the laws to be a bit more encompassing than what they currently are. And at the moment, it's very easy to try and have a blanket rule and say, look, this is this is the one rule for everybody, and we stick by it. But how conducive is that to the growth of the game? That's, for me, has got to be one of the key points in any of these decisions that are being made in the laws. Is moving forward progressively. So but it's a tough one. I don't have all the answers. I'd like to see, when it comes to eligibility, for me, I think a 2 year, maybe a 1 year stand down period for anybody who's had less than 5 caps for a tier 1 nation would be sensible. And then maybe another 6 months for every 5 caps above that. So if Charles Piatel, for example, he's got 15 caps for the All Blacks, he'd have to observe a 2 year stand down period before he could play for Tonga, if that's what he wanted to. You'd only be able to make one shift from from tier 1 to tier 2, and he would never be able to change allegiances again. I think that for me, that's sensible. But I agree. What's sensible to me isn't necessarily what's sensible to everyone. But we need to have these discussions. We need to be able. It can't be just locked in and never revisit these situations. I think Bill Beaumont has promised a revisit to this homecoming law, and let's hope that the right people are in that room when it comes to having these conversations, so that the right outcomes can be made for everybody, and not just for what's right for the tier 1 nations.
And with regards to the residency rule, now that it's been increased to 5 years, are you slightly worried that this could mean more players are getting poached from the islands at a younger age? Because I've seen, Edinburgh have recently signed a 17-year-old South African boy, and Glasgow gone down the same route. Does that worry you at all, that perhaps, French teams, English teams, Scottish teams, whatever, they'll maybe come to the islands? We know that they've got scouting networks all over the place now. Does that concern you at all?
Yeah, it does. It does, and this is why it's important that before these sorts of conclusions are jumped upon, and just announce that they need to have the right people in the room to actually look at the wider impacts of some of these laws that they're making. And I don't think that's been the case in the sport since it went professional. I think a lot of decisions have been made that haven't looked at the wider impacts of this, particularly for us as the Pacific Islands. Because good. So we are already seeing the ramifications of that 5-year residency rule. And the fact that the average age of children that are being offered scholarships in the Pacific is getting substantially lower every year. And so not just in New Zealand and Australia, but further afield now. And for me, that's an adverse effect of some of these laws that are passed through without having the right people around the table actually work out the true effects of such laws. Because it's very easy to say, 5 years, we'll just change it from 3 years to 5 years, and that'll solve the problem. But actually, it just opens up this other, a bigger can of worms, to the point where we've got now 11 and 12-year-old kids leaving our shores, and being pushed by their parents because of the lack of opportunities in the islands, to go and take up, professional rugby opportunities. And again, it's so young, to be away from your family, and your support networks, in a totally different country. It's these are why we, one of the, some of the key reasons why we felt like we needed to make the documentary, to actually provide a counterbalance to some of the decisions and that decision-making process that is currently occurring. My faith in the system, and the fact that and the people around those decision-making tables is quite low at the moment. There's a lot of fixes that need to happen. If you to do that, it comes again with putting support networks in place for, with dealing with the lowering of age for kids coming through. So none of that's been taken into consideration with that 5-year residency law change. And the ones that pick up the pieces are us as Pacific Rugby players, well, because we're on the ground dealing with this on a global context. But we don't get any funding from World Rugby, who are making these laws, and it's very, very difficult. We end up having to do these public appeals and raising money for, via Just Giving, and to try and support people, that find themselves in incredibly difficult positions. We need to get around that table. We need to get around that table promptly, to have an effect on those root causes of these wider symptoms.
Great. And I've kept you on here for quite some time, so I'll kind of set towards wrapping up. I see that they've picked the Manoa Pacifica squad for the game against the Maori All Blacks, and there's been talk about a possible Super Rugby franchise for Pacifica players. Although, when they've talked about it, they've sort of about basing it in Sydney or Auckland. What do you think about that idea? Do you think that's a worthwhile idea? Do you think would it make money for the Pacific Island nations? Would it filter down, or do you think it's maybe just, again, lip service and also an avenue for exploitation?
Yeah, I think at the risk of sounding a bit of a Debbie Downer here, the concept is a good one. For a long time we've lacked a professional pathway closer to home for our players to, and particularly in Super Rugby. It's an avenue, again, not just for exposure for our players, but also to provide that pathway for them to represent, hopefully, their island nations. I haven't got the confidences that I need yet from the organisers that isn't necessarily the case with Moana Pacifica. The proximity of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association and actually tabling that bid for Super Rugby has me worried, to be quite honest. The New Zealand Rugby Players Association is an organisation whose mandate it is to better and to look after and progress New Zealand professional players. So I don't know. I don't really know what they are doing, chairing and tabling a team, a Super Rugby team, which is supposedly for the benefit of the Pacific Islands. I've got questions with it. They'll play the New Zealand Maori this weekend. Is it a fact? Is it that all the players that will play in that team against the Maori on the weekend will now be locked in, and qualified solely for the Pacific Islands teams? I don't know. I'll try and find out those answers. But again, for me, there needs to be, these teams, all the players are New Zealand-based players. The management squads are all New Zealand-based. For me, any team that's going to brand themselves as a Pacific team has got to be for the greater good of the Pacific Island Union. So they've got to be based long-term in the islands to inspire our people for the economic, resources that team, the benefits got to be for the Pacific Islands in terms of tourism, and it's got to be for the greater development of our local unions. Players that are coming through there must be eligible and qualify for the Pacific Islands, first and foremost. So once I get those assurances, then I'll probably be able to answer that question. But it's just it's a bit clouded at the moment, just because we don't know enough about it. And, they're asking us to commit as the Pacific Islands to this team for the next 10, 15 years. For me, we need to know a bit more, because I might be a little bit cynical, but if you look at, again, long term, and in history, even our closest neighbours, New Zealand, haven't always done the best thing by the Pacific Islands in terms of helping us develop. So, we need to ask these tough questions, and if not us, then who else, I suppose.
Okay, that's great, Dan. I think I've taken up enough of your time. So, Whai Whaitai Lava, Mr. Leo, and all the best. Oh, sorry?
Thanks so much. No. Thanks so much for having me, and I just want to thank everyone, on this platform who's supported the Oceans Apart film, and got behind us, sent me messages on Twitter, and and also the Scottish public. We've got a strong connection as Samoa with Scotland, and I tried to drop a few little hints in there. How thankful we are to to Scotland rugby as well. We're not quite where we need to be in terms of the tier one, but in terms of all of those tier one nations, I think Scotland can happily, be proud of the fact that they've done a lot, probably the most out of all of the tier one nations to support us as Pacific Islands. I had some fond games against the Scots, not just in Murrayfield, but also in Samoa, which I can't say about anyone else from the tier one nations. So thanks very much. Thanks for having me, and hopefully I'll be back on here one day celebrating some good news.
Well, you can come on anytime. All right, anytime at all. Thank you ever so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Dan. All right, cheers.
Appreciate it, eh?
Ta,
Cheers,
bye.
guys.